Hello and welcome. It is 2:30. It is the 9th day of April 2021. I am your grumpy guide to all things gaming, and I have a headache, which is why I'm sitting in the dark. So it's time for the weekly DM tip, GM tip, help you be a better gamer thing. I don't know. So here's something I found on character backstory. Should you create an elaborate backstory for your character, or should the character's adventures tell their own story? It's a question posed. And I think the answer is yes to both. I think the characters in your world, the player characters, should have some backstory. I don't know if they need a super duper elaborate 32-page backstory detailing every moment of their life leading up to the second they left the door to go out adventuring. But obviously, they have a history that happened before that moment where they decided to go out the door and go adventuring. They don't just appear on the adventuring world full-formed. Boop! Even video game characters have at least some opening scene explaining what they're doing there, some opening cinematic. So, yes, there should be some backstory. And there has been a long history all the way back to Traveler and, of course, life paths and central casting, and even to today with, Tasha's helping you with develop backstory. I mean, of helping to try and generate the events that led up to the character going adventuring. I mean, even if you just want to go the simplest bare bones, D&D added that, background option that your character did something or your character's family did something to help sort of, round you out, I mean, you picked Acolyte because maybe you were the third born member of the family, and usually in a medieval setting, the firstborn, inherits everything, rule of primogeniture. There's something on my face, isn't there? The second kid is married off to somebody for dowry, land, whatever, and then the third kid's like, we're sending you to the church to become an acolyte. That's a pretty standard real-world medieval history for somebody. So yeah, but there's a couple different backgrounds. I mean, you were apprenticed to a blacksmith at the age of 12, whatever. So whether it's just simple, or you can get more complex with life paths and stuff like that, but they don't need to be an epic odyssey leading up to your characters exiting the house and going to adventure, because it's sort of an agreement between you and the DM if any of that actually happened. And two, unless it's actually going to affect the game, there's really, again, other than maybe your own personal internal theater, to write that 30-page backstory. I mean, if you want to write a 30-page backstory, that's great. If it gives you pleasure and brings you joy, there's nothing telling you can't. But just understand that 30-page backstory is not going to be a major aspect of the world. There might be things from that 30-page backstory that you and the DM could work out that could be little teeny goalposts in the story of the character, like somewhere in that 30-page backstory there is an event like, I don't know, you got in a fight with your roommate at college and you burnt his face and he blames you, even though it was really his fault, and he's now wearing a mask, and he's devoted his life to proving... Oh, wait, that's the origin of Doctor Doom, isn't it? But you get the idea. Now, on the other half, there's also something to be said of telling the character's story through the adventure, which is how most of, the 90% of the history of the hobby has done. We generally assume the character did something before they went adventuring, but really you want to know who the character is through adventuring. Because even if you did write the 30-page backstory, when you actually sit down to play the character, it can still take a game or two or three to actually feel yourself in the character's skin and figure out actually who this person is. And then as you're playing the character, I mean, this happens to me all the time, and this happens to almost everybody I've ever gamed with. You know, in your mind, my character is X. But then you start playing, and you're like, oh, you know what? My character isn't X. My character's Y. I know I set out to start that my character was going to be like this and act like this and, you know, do these things. But now that I've played the character a session or two, yeah, I'm kind of thinking that that's going to go someplace a different direction. And let's explore that and see where I'm going with that. And then you start telling the character story as you play. And then maybe, depending upon how much give and take is with you in the DM, you could say, hey, you know, I have this blacksmith background, and we're in a town with a blacksmith. What's the chance I know that blacksmith? Or know about her forging style? Is there some way I could maybe, you know, talk to them and maybe learn some secrets from them and maybe, you know, trade information and maybe get a discount on blacksmithy stuff? And the DM can say, hey, I really like that. I don't know, roll a something, and if it's over a number or under a number, depending upon what system, sure, yeah. Or, you know, just whatever. It could just be an agreement. Sure, yeah, you know that guy. It sounds cool. I like where you're going with this. Let's play it. Or the DM could say, yeah, no. I mean, hopefully the DM says, yeah, I like that because it's kind of a cool idea and allows you, the player, to have some sense of a little level of control in the game without interrupting the play. So, yes, the character should have some background, but not too much. And, yes, the character story should develop as you're playing. The backstory is cool. It's important. It can help flesh out little, you know, empty areas in the character. Like, why do I know this skill? Doesn't really make sense. Oh, maybe, you know, I spent a year traveling, or hanging out with some people, and they taught me that skill. I don't know. Whatever. You know what I mean. You just don't want the backstory to become the center of your character's life, and you just don't want the backstory to circumvent the actual adventure. It should never be as important as what the story the DM and you were telling together going forward from episode 1. So it should never be the thing that just goes, I'm going to blow up your campaign. I'm not going to do that because on page 15 of my 37 backstory, it says that this, and this, and this, and this. And the DM's like, I never agreed to that. There's no magical fountain of banana-flavored wishing juice in my world. And you're like, well, nope, it says so in my backstory, so there obviously is a magical fountain of banana-flavored wishing juice in your game. And if you don't let me have that banana fountain of wishing juice, I'm going to leave your game. Yeah, that's when the backstory becomes destructive to the game. So, again, session 0. This is why session 0 is so important. That way you and the people telling the story together can all be like, hey, I agree with this, and blah, blah, blah. And maybe this other player has something going on in their backstory, and then there's two of you can be like, oh my god, you wrote in your backstory that you trained under a blacksmith? I wrote under my backstory that I trained under a blacksmith. Maybe we trained under the same blacksmith. It's unlikely that a blacksmith would have more than one apprentice unless he's a really good blacksmith and makes a lot of money, because taking care of an apprentice is expensive. But this is D&D, so yeah, sure, he, you know, is a magical blacksmith that can support 2+ apprentices. Why the fuck not? It doesn't really do that much damage to change the story because, well, yeah, it was a one-time thing. The DM says, yeah, sure, he went through a thing where he trained a lot of apprentices, and then he realized, I can't afford these people, so he stopped. And now he only has one, which, you know, that way these two guys are still like, hey, we went to blacksmith school together. And then another person's like, oh my god, my character worked at a coal mine. Maybe I brought the coal to your blacksmithy. And then, yes, the backstory is all intertwine and make the characters all kind of feel like they have a home and they have something that happened in their past, and they had this fleshed out reality that existed before they started adventuring. But you don't want that to destroy the game. You don't want that to become the wall that the campaign throws itself against. So there's got to be some give and take, and it's much more fun and much more interesting to develop part of the story as you're telling the story, as you're moving forward, You know, maybe something that was said during session 0, something that the DM said, something that you said and then forgot about, suddenly comes into play 3 or 4, 5, 6 games down the road. And now you've been playing that character. Now you're like, I kind of feel like my character's like this, and maybe I could do this, and I don't know, is there a way could I pick this? Or I really think that it would be cool if my character learned how to speak half-orc. I don't know if there is a half-orc language, but anyway. If my character could speak sheep, is there somebody here who could teach my character how to speak sheep? And you're like, oh, well, I don't know. I mean, I hadn't thought of that, but I don't see why there isn't somebody in my world who could teach you how to speak sheep. And it sort of feels like that's something that maybe your character would have picked up at some point in their life. So, yeah, take 2 weeks, spend 50 gold, you learn how to speak sheep. Doesn't really circumvent the campaign that much. It adds a little bit more to whatever happened back here. Why did I learn how to speak sheep? Maybe I spent 2 years working in the sheep monastery, studying under the great sheep master and the hidden art of sheep foo. And now I have that in my backstory, which we've developed as we're playing. Because, you might have this idea in your head, and then when you play the character, you're like, oh, my idea's changed. That happens all the time. So, should you have a backstory? Yes. Should it be a long, drawn-out 32-page backstory that could self-destruct your campaign? No. Should the story of the character develop while you're playing through the campaign, and you and the DM and the other players all sort of develop this collective theater, and then things happen that could maybe then backwards compatible be part of that backstory, and also something from that backstory could add to the story going further without self-destructing the game? Yes, 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 yes. Yes to all the above. If you appreciate this content, let me know. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. Help me hit 500 subs by August. I'm going to go now because my head is killing me, and get off my lawn.